So I want to give you an overview of the China Shoe Patcher, show you what it's able to do and see if it's right for you. I've had this one now for 6 years or so. It still stitches very well. It's same as it was when I got it. I've done a couple modifications. That's one thing that's very common with these machines is people like to customize these and trick them out a little bit. So when you get them, usually this part here and this part here is raw metal, just like this bar here. So I went ahead and I took that off and then I covered around that and I just painted it with some enamel paint, quick and easy. That way I don't have to worry about keeping that polished up or anything for my work. The other modification I did to it was I cut off the end of my presser foot. It was enclosed at the very end of it. A lot of the machines that I see for sale now actually have this feature already done to it. And then I dipped mine into some rubber dip to get rid of those aggressive teeth on the bottom. And again, this is a machine meant for working on shoes. So the teeth that are aggressive on the bottom of the presser foot are normally needed for what this machine is meant for. But a lot of us here in North America, we use these machines for leathercraft, and we don't want the teeth. So I dipped mine in some rubber dip. All this stuff I will link down in the description so you can find it. And then on the bottom of the rubber grip, sometimes that doesn't pull the leather when it's walking. So what I do is I glue a little piece of 2000 grit sandpaper and then just cut out the cavity here for the needle to pass through, and that works really well. So right now I'm going to thread it up. When you get yours, it will probably have a little post right here for a spool of thread. I've taken mine off and instead I use this. This is just a thread mast, and again I'll link that below. And then I'm going to put my thread on here and I'm going to go ahead and thread this machine up. Now to thread it up, one of the things you will need to do, and you'll make this yourself, is just get a piece of wire and put a little hook on the end of it. That hook will go up through your needle bar and come out up here and then pull the thread back down so it can be threaded through your needle. You can push the thread down yourself, but it's time consuming. Sometimes the thread bunches up. Using a piece of wire really does save a lot of time. So let's go ahead and thread up the machine and I'll show you how that's done. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the thread from my thread mast back here. I'm going to hook it onto the top of the thread mast. I'm going to take the thread over and there's a hole right here. Just going to pass that through that hole and pull it out underneath. Alright, so after it's threaded through the bar, I'm going to put it through just one of these tension plates here. Again, this machine is designed and has been used for a very long time in China and other parts of Asia. It is a shoemaker's machine. It's meant to handle a very, very thick and heavy thread. So I'm only going to use one of these tension plates. If I use both of them, it may not pull this thread through and it will snap before it pulls it through. So after that, I'm going to come over to this little coil here. I'm going to feed the thread through that coil and pull it up. And then up here, this little piece, there's a little eyelet on it. I'm going to go under the bar. I'm going to feed through that eyelet. Now it's time to take the wire threader. I'm going to put it up into the channel. And it's going to come out right here at the top. I'm going to hook my thread through, and down here I'm going to pull the end all the way out. Alright, and this is the needle that I have currently in it. It is a hex leather point needle. It's an 18 by 110 or a 15 by 1. So that is actually a shorter needle than what comes with the machine. The machine originally came with full-length industrial sewing machine needles. I found it sewed better for what I needed with a smaller needle since I was using a smaller thread. Because the back of every needle has a channel cut into it, and that channel is a groove for the thread to go into. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to pass it through the needle, raise the presser foot back up. I'm going to pull the thread to the back. And I already have my bobbin installed in here into the shuttle. See it moving there. I'm going to close the hatch, and the thread is pulled out through this little notch right there, so it doesn't hurt the thread. Secure that. And now I'm going to pull back on the top thread. I'm going to crank my machine one time, and it's going to lift up the thread from the bobbin, and now it's pretty much ready to sew. One thing I will say about using a shorter needle is to be careful how thick the work is that you're sewing. Because as you can see here, if I'm sewing like this, it's very easy for the piece right here to make contact with your presser foot. And if your thread is in that pinch point, it is going to crush your thread and your thread will snap. But that's one of the problems with using a shorter needle like I am. Now you can use a longer industrial sewing machine needle. This is just my preference. Now you will have to adjust the height of your needle bar to match the timing for that. And there's plenty of videos online, and I think I've even talked about that in a previous video on this channel. So now what I want to do is I want to prep a piece of leather for sewing. Now this is a fairly thick piece of leather. It's a sample of harness leather from Wickett & Craig. It's good sturdy leather. I'm going to thin half of it out over here on my skiver to show you it can go from thin to thick without a whole lot of problems. Now any of you that do leather work and you need a thinner piece of leather, a lot of the time you have to skive it by hand, or you have to use one of these things, which is a French skiver. Now this is a good little tool. I've shown this in videos before, and you can go onto the back of your leather or the front of it, and you can just take a nice piece of leather out and you can thin it down to whatever thickness you want. It's good for belts. But if you're looking for a skiver that doesn't break the bank, this one right here is also a good choice. This one right here only costs about $150 at the time of making this video, and I've seen them go for $500 to $1,000 for other ones from other makers. So I'm just going to thin out my leather right here. This is harder to do one-handed, but if I wanted to, I can just tighten that down right here, and now I can pull with both hands. Now as you can see, that thinned that leather down quite well. I find that this is a good tool to use with the shoe patcher, so you're not ordering a bunch of different thicknesses of leather. So let's go ahead and head over to the shoe patcher and sew this up. Alright, so to start stitching, you're going to grab your thread and you're going to pull it back a little bit. We're going to take our leather, and I'm going to start on the thin end over here. Just place that in. I'm going to pull my thread backwards to give it a little bit of tension, and then I'm going to hand crank it. You can see it's making nice small stitches. Those stitches look a little loose, so I'm going to come up here. I'm going to tighten down the tension just a little bit, and let's stitch again. And those look a lot better. Just that tiny little bit of change in tension was all it needed. Now I'm going to come over here to the thick side of the leather. I'm also going to straighten out my presser foot. One of the nice features about this machine is the presser foot spins in all directions, and I actually recommend that for back stitching rather than spinning your work around and stitching backwards through, because it tends to break the thread when you do that. Alright, as you can see, it's still stitching really nice. So I'm going to come up here to this little knob, this little bolt, and I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, and that's going to make our stitch longer. Spin and make my corner here. You can see that stitch is getting longer. Let's go ahead and travel back. Okay, and now instead of spinning my work around like this to stitch it and then stitching back here, I find that tends to break the thread, tends to twist it. So I'm going to spin this backwards, and that's how I'm going to do my back stitch. Come up, spin it around again, make sure that's straight. And all that took was a little bit of eye coordination. And as you can see, it backstitched just fine. So let's go ahead and see how fast this can go. Alright, and as you can see, it's stitching. Now, some of these stitches here are not even, and that's because my presser foot is slipping. And again, I have modified this one, and I have it dipped into the Plasti handle dip. And that is to take care of the abrasive teeth at the bottom. You can, of course, not do this. I have seen some people who take these and they grind them smooth, and then they file little marks into them to get them to pull the leather. I've also seen other people have them filed smooth, and then they diamond plate them. Overall, for the money, for around $150, this is a great little machine, and it will stitch to your heart's content. It is a little quirky at some points. You will find things like the metal is unfinished in some places. That's why I painted this. You'll also find that you want to do some modifications like I did to the presser foot. You don't have to do any of these modifications. The only thing I would recommend that you should do is put a lock washer on here behind that nut, because that tends to walk off, and just putting a little lock washer there and then putting that nut there keeps your flywheel from coming off. As far as maintenance on the machine, it's pretty carefree. I used to use lithium grease in here. Now I currently just use sewing machine oil. I used to only use sewing machine oil on the upper components, and then this rod in here I would use that lithium grease on, and then also the cams back here. But now I only use sewing machine oil on it, seeing as how this is a sewing machine and that is a purpose-made oil for sewing machines. So things that pair well with this machine are the thread mass. I like using the thread mass a lot better than putting that on there, because I can put a cone. If I have a big cone of thread, I can put the cone of thread on there rather than having to manage to keep it on here. Again, I like using the leather skiver with it, but that's just my personal opinion. You could easily use one of these things here. But overall, this is a fun little machine. It will sew thicker than this. But also note, as you go into thicker leather, you will have to make your stitch a little bit longer, because the way that foot walks, it's going to walk a shorter distance on thicker leather. So play with it, find out how you like it, set it up. There's a lot of support for these online. There's several Facebook groups out there that do all kinds of modifications for these. I have a video on this channel where I put a motor on it one time. I've seen other people where they build a flatbed for it, where you can have a flat tabletop that goes around the bar right here, so you can just lay things on there and pass them through. I've put a hose clamp on here to keep this from spinning before. These are a fun little machine. They can be frustrating sometimes. Sometimes they don't always work right, especially if you don't know a sewing machine, you might chase a problem. That's really where the online support comes in, and I'm so glad those communities exist, because they've helped me have a lot of fun with this machine. So I hope this has been helpful. Keep an eye out for more videos. I'm Jonathan Von Hans. Take care.